Tonight, Ed is going to be giving our closing keynote, and I'm happy that he's here. About a year and a half ago, we invited Ed to come out to Seattle and give another talk about mental health, and this talk is kind of a follow-up to that one. And so I'm happy that we're able to bring him here to the conference to do that follow-up talk. So I think that's all I wanted to say. So let's bring Ed up here.
I just saw a kid walk in, and you might want to get earmuffs on him. Actually, I know that kid. Hi, kid. I can't remember your name, but you're awesome. Hi. They don't know what I'm doing. Anyway. Yeah. Sweet Jesus. Who is that guy? So this is a talk about mental health and developer community, and I'm wearing the Fine t-shirt, which, by the way, is very gauche. You should not wear the t-shirt of your band, so don't do that. So Stronger Than Fear, Mental Health and Developer Community. There's an alternate title, I'm Crazy and So Can You, that Chris Hart just came up with. And so, who am I? Well, crazy motherfucker. So I'm a dad and I'm a husband, a developer type. I've been a web developer for about 20 years. PHP probably a little over 15. Occasional musician, a big nerd. I like nerdy stuff mostly. I also have a mental illness, or really a couple actually. Now, I'm just a person. I'm not a licensed mental health professional. I cannot diagnose you. I cannot tell you what you should do or should not do. I am certified in mental health first aid, but that doesn't mean I can diagnose you or give you lots of advice that you should really follow. But I am here to talk about what it's like to have a mental illness from my perspective and how that impacts the tech community and the larger culture. And so I'm going to ask you, this is going to be an audience participation thing, so I'll warm up your arms here for a second. I'm curious, how many of you need glasses or contacts or some sort of eye corrective system? Okay. So, yep, lots of, even the loud folks over there, they're drunk already, are dangers of alcohol at conferences, please. I should shut up, I'm sorry. There hasn't been any drinking, I made that up. I'm curious, I would like you to raise your hands if you are afraid to tell people that you use these devices. So I haven't, anybody? Usually somebody, at least as a joke to kind of mess with me, raises their hand about it. Have you ever had anyone say, please raise your hand if you do, something like regarding the corrective lenses or eye assist devices that you use, you're not trying hard enough? Has anyone ever told you that? Or have you tried squinting? Has anyone ever told you that? So if somebody has told you that, I'm sorry, and you win the privilege award of the year. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for this.
It's like the person who told me he's my partner, he's like a director for mental health.
Okay, well, at least he's got good mental health stuff, maybe work on the eye ocular issues, but well, his sensitivity's there, but we all have our things, right? Yeah, fair enough, yeah. Pluses and minuses of relationships. I'm curious, now, I have, had a brother, and my dad has type 2 diabetes as well. And diabetes is a little more serious, I mean, it's kind of not as common, but a pretty common condition that lots of people have. I'm curious, how many of you would feel comfortable talking with, say, a coworker or colleague about diabetes? Just in conversation, maybe you wouldn't be like, hey guys, diabetes, what do you think? But would you feel comfortable if it came up in discussion? It would not be. So please raise those hands high so I can, there we go. That's all got excited about it. That's good. And so, yeah, so most of us would feel okay with that. Now, cancer, I actually just lost a brother to cancer just a few months ago. But that's something that we talk about a lot more than we used to. 40, 50 years ago, people did not talk about cancer. That was not something that they did. They did not wear pink gloves and shoes at the World Series or anything like that, because NFL wasn't that popular then, so that's why it's the World. But I'm curious, same question about that. We're like a colleague, somebody you work with. Would you feel comfortable discussing, again, maybe not the intro to your discussion, but discussing cancer with somebody like that? So most people would probably feel like that. Might not be the first thing you bring up in the morning to set a tone, but you would. Now I'm curious, how many of you would feel comfortable talking with that colleague, that coworker, about a mental health issue? I'd like you to raise your hand if you would. So the longer I wait, more hands go up. But it seems like perhaps there was a little hesitation with that.
Private.
And in private, yeah, in private, certainly. And you can imagine different circumstances where you might do that. Now, how about your boss, your supervisor? Would you feel comfortable discussing that same issue? Not that many people. Not that many people. How about a friend or a family member? So most people would. That's good. That's more than I've seen in some places. So I want you to think about that a little bit while we're talking about this stuff, and we talk about mental health and the kinds of issues that mental disorders that they cause culturally, and how they affect us sort of in this industry. And I'm going to talk a little bit though about myself and the diagnoses that I have that I've been working on. I was first started dealing with this stuff, really sort of diagnosed with something when I was 12, I think. And so I've been doing treatment and other things like that since then, and I just turned 40. So I have a couple different diagnoses that I work with. Right now, there's things that I deal with every day and have been dealing with for many years. Generalized anxiety disorder is the first one, and then adult ADHD is the other one. Generalized anxiety disorder is something that anxiety disorders are pretty common. Generalized anxiety disorder doesn't necessarily have to do with a specific thing, but it can often be that you're generally anxious about. You might have a multiple set of triggers, things that kind of upset you. But the idea is that you're having an anxiety reaction, a stress reaction, where you're getting nervous, you're getting uncomfortable, but you have a more extreme reaction than maybe someone would who is normative on the scale of that kind of thing. Or you have it for things that would normally not impact anyone or send somebody into that kind of a stress reaction. They do send you into that. So sometimes there's physical manifestations of that. For me, my chest will get tight, feel sick to my stomach. I used to have what do they call that? IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and so that was tightly tied, unfortunately, to my anxiety levels. And it got so bad, I didn't want to drive more than 10 minutes when I was in my early to late 20s. I was terrified to do that, terrified to travel, things like that. A big thing that I often talk about, or an example that I give, is that I get really, really freaked out about going into situations where I don't understand the rules, kind of. So a good example of that would be, I really don't like to ride public transit systems or public transport of any kind, unless if I have a buddy who understands it, I'm okay. But to do it myself is a really, really upsetting and uncomfortable thing for me. And it doesn't seem like it really should be, but I will actively avoid doing those. Like, I don't want to get on a bus. I'll actively avoid doing that. Even though it is by far the most sensible thing to do in order to get from place A to place B, I will not do it because it makes me so uncomfortable. And then adult ADHD, the kind of ADHD that I have, and there's a couple different varieties of it. Like a lot of folks, I have trouble focusing on stuff, particularly things I'm not interested in. I avoid less appealing tasks to an extreme amount, not sort of like, I don't really feel like doing that, but like it is very, very hard to nail myself down and make myself do something that I'm not interested in doing. I also have a really low frustration threshold. Like, I get frustrated quickly, and the emotions that I feel are often very intense and very quick, so I will get frustrated very quickly, and I will get very frustrated. Or other kinds of emotions that will happen quickly from that. I'm also really, really good at constructing bad outcomes and hyper-focusing on them. So if there's something that, and it often ties in very closely with my anxiety, so if there's something that I'm worried about that potentially might be something that makes me kind of uncomfortable, I will quickly construct a scenario in my head, or several, in which everything goes bad and I will worry about it a lot. And a good example would be, I'm sure many of us have gotten, say, an email over the weekend that says, hey, on Monday, maybe we could come in and we needed to talk about something, get that from a supervisor or your boss or something like that. And I will be convinced within 10 minutes that I've lost my job, and we will be homeless and out on the street, and my life will be over. And that's just the scenario. I construct that scenario very quickly and get there very fast. And it's very hard for me to sort of let go of that and tell myself, no, it's not like that. It's probably not going to happen. And I logically know that, but it's very hard for me to stop feeling that way. Now, I take a few different medications for this kind of stuff. And I take 4 things primarily. I take something called Lexapro, which is an SSRI, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. That is a common thing that people will take for depression or often anxiety disorders. Prozac was the first one on the market that is like that, and they've all been basically sort of modifications of that. Since then, Buspar is an anti-anxiety medication. Also seems to have some effectiveness with making SSRIs more effective, which is kind of when they're taken in concert. And then I also take Strattera, which is a medication for ADHD, and I think it is the only medication approved, at least in the United States, for ADHD or ADD that is not an amphetamine. Every other medication on the market is an amphetamine. And for many people who have anxiety disorders, taking speed actually is not a good idea. And so that's something. Now, I've known people who do have anxiety disorders and also take things like Adderall for ADHD, and they're okay, but it wasn't okay for me. So, and then the final thing I take primarily for is this Klonopin, which is a benzo. It's a tranquilizer, sort of like Xanax or things like that. And I also see a therapist, and about every 2 weeks, and we talk about how and why I do the things that I do, why I have these certain kinds of behaviors, and try to figure out strategies to sort of address those things. And there's a strong, for me, I have found that I really need to do both. Medication helps me, but also psychotherapy helps me a lot. And I do something called cognitive behavior therapy quite a bit, which is pretty common and really effective for anxiety disorders and has helped me a lot. But those are both aspects, and I think important aspects, at least for my treatment. I think one of the things that's really challenging with with dealing with mental health issues, mental health disorders, is this feeling that you're alone and not like anybody else. And it's really easy to do that when there's things happening in your head, and the way that you feel things and the way that you perceive things, the way you react to situations seems different than the way people are reacting around you. And that has a lot to do with the fact that we don't talk so much about this stuff. The feeling I have had many times in the past and for long periods of my life is that there was something wrong with me fundamentally, and I was never going to figure it out. And that I could not, for some reason, exist in society and be productive and be happy. That there was a impedance mismatch between the way my brain worked and the way that the world worked. And I couldn't figure that out. And that is a very, very lonely feeling. And what I've learned over the past several years is that there's a lot of people who feel like that. And there's a lot of people in the tech industry and elsewhere who feel like that. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of how this affects us. And this is really on sort of a societal level. first thing you'll see is that any given study, at least if you're talking about people in the U.S., and it's pretty consistent across industrialized nations, I think, is that you'll see about 1 in 5 adults have a mental disorder any given year. About 20% of the population is dealing with something in a given year or at a given time. Those numbers vary slightly from study to study, but it's pretty consistent. Of that group, anxiety disorders are the most common. It's also depressive disorders, things like eating disorders, psychological disorders like schizophrenia, substance abuse, things like that. Numbers can vary based on whether they include substance abuse in that or not. Side note, I personally think most substance abuse problems are caused because of untreated mental health issues. But that's kind of me just saying that, so take it with a grain of salt. One of the interesting things is there's a good study. It was actually released in 2004 by the World Health Organization called The Global Burden of Disease. And in it, they talked about the level of disability people experience with different mental health disorders. And so they did a comparison between a couple of things. And this was just dealing with depression. They felt that moderate depression had a similar level of disability to people with multiple sclerosis or who had severe asthma, both of which can be very debilitating. Severe depression had a similar level of disability to quadriplegia. A very significant impact on your ability to be productive in life and have a quote-unquote normal life in society. There's also this metric they kind of came up with called disease burden. It's in that same document. And it's basically premature death plus years lived with a disability. And putting those things together, they come up with this number, which, figure these things out. And in that, the burden, that disease burden number, the burden of mental disorders was the largest of all the categories in North America. That's higher than cardiovascular disease, and that's higher than cancer. That's higher than anything else. And a quote from that study by the World Health Organization. In all regions, neuropsychiatric conditions are the most important causes of disability, accounting for around 1/3 of years lost to disability among adults aged 15 years and over. So that is enormously impactful. And it's hard to state how high a number that is. Now, typically what you would see is that premature death was much lower with psychiatric conditions. Years lived and time lost, productivity lost to these disabilities, these disorders, was significantly higher than anything else. Way, way, way higher. It's interesting then to look at, maybe break down a little bit of economic costs from that. Mental health conditions are the second leading cause of workplace absenteeism. That's very significant amount. Workers with depression, we're again just talking about depression, ignoring other things like anxiety disorders and a wide swath of other mental health disorders. Workers with depression lose about 5.6 hours a week of productive time, and workers without depression lose about 1.5. So significantly higher with that single condition. Again, with depression, 43.7 billion in absenteeism from work. Lost productivity and direct treatment. Those are very high numbers, and that's just dealing with one, and in fact not the not the largest category. Although depression, of course, is a very impactful one, particularly on productivity. Now, what we did in September of last year, August and September of last year, is put together this survey, and it was specifically aimed at people who work in tech. And we got about 1,300 responses from it, which was really great to get numbers like that. Now, I've culled this out because a lot of the questions I asked were really sort of focused on people who were not self-employed and people who worked in the U.S. because of the kind of questions that I asked. So a lot of stuff wasn't really applicable. So the numbers that I have here are specifically folks in the U.S. who are non-self-employed. And I'm hoping to do something like that again this year or soon that has some info like that. But we can look at this data now, and I still think it tells a very interesting story about how we perceive mental health in the workplace, given the impact that we know it has on society as a whole. So, a first question here. Do you feel that your employer takes mental health as seriously as physical health? And we had 49% of people said yes. And about half said either don't know or no. Actively said no. 25% said don't know, which probably means that it's not even come up. Probably their employers never talked with them about it. They've never actively said, yes, X is, we consider that the same way. Another question, do you think that discussing a health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? And we wanted to compare physical and mental health issues there. Well, with physical, over 3/4 felt that no, it would not have an impact. Maybe 20%. And you can imagine, certain depends on, I guess, the condition. 4% said yes. And we compare that to how again, these are folks who work in the U.S., how they perceive that there would be, if they perceive that there would be negative consequences for mental health issues. Only about 1/3 said no. 1/4 felt that yes, there absolutely would be, and maybe, which is a very high number, is 2/5. That's about 2/3 of people say yes or maybe there would be negative consequences for discussing this. Another question. Would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? I hear this question a lot where people are talking about how do they assess how a company is going to feel about working with me. How are they going to accommodate me? So would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? With physical, no is 44%, oftentimes maybe not relevant. Makes sense. Maybe 44% again, and yes is 12%. So those numbers, it isn't necessarily something that you would bring up right away. May or may not be relevant. It may be something that you don't want to disclose because you're worried about, maybe there would be a consequence that I wouldn't get a job. So let's look at mental health issues and ask the same question in that context. 85% of people said no, they would not bring it up. Now again, keep this in mind in the context of the numbers that we looked at, that it is the category of disorders that impacts us the most in terms of disease burden. And yet, people are terrified to talk about it. They feel strongly that if they bring this up in an interview, they're not going to get a job. That, by the way, is illegal under the Americans with Disability Act, but is incredibly hard to prove. Do you know the options for mental health care your employer provides? 40% said yes, but 3/5 said not sure or no, don't know. No, we didn't compare that with do they know about what physical health care, but my guess is that they probably do. At least those numbers would be higher. That tells me people aren't talking about it. People aren't saying that, yeah, this is okay. You can treat this the same way. You can feel safe about asking these questions. Does your employer provide resources to learn more about mental health issues and how to seek help? An important aspect of creating a safe workplace for disorders like this, only 26% said yes. 38%, almost 40% said no. Almost 40% again said don't know, which I think is just the same as no if you're not aware of what's going on. That means you haven't been told, so whatever communication methods they've been using have been ineffective. Is your anonymity protected if you choose to take advantage of mental health or substance abuse treatment resources? Again, something covered under the ADA in the United States. It is illegal to not protect their anonymity, and there's a lot of laws related to that. Do you know if your anonymity is going to be protected by your employer? Only 30% say yes. Most people don't know. They don't have necessarily, they're not sure if they can expect their legal rights to be protected in this case. How easy is it for you to take medical leave for a mental health condition? Which fundamentally is probably the biggest question about, are you treating mental health and physical health the same way? How easy is it? Over half don't know. They're not told. Nobody tells them anything about it. It doesn't come up. Nobody says anything. 13% say very easy. 18% said somewhat easy. You got 14% here that say somewhat difficult or very difficult. Maybe they've tried. My experience has been most people say, I'm going to the doctor, I'm out sick. They say things like that. They have to lie either by leaving out information or by actively saying it's some other condition. I have a cold, stomach flu, whatever. Key thing is here, sick workers don't work or they're significantly less productive. I mean, that's just the way it is. So if you're looking at it purely from an economic standpoint, it is actively dumb to ignore this. It is willful ignorance is really a bad idea here. And it's interesting to see only 41% of people in the U.S. with a mental disorder received professional help last year. And yet, again, I'm just talking about depression here. Half the people who seek help for depression wait 8 years or longer. And the longer the delay, the more difficult recovery can be. People with mental health problems are more likely to seek help if someone close to them suggests it. So by not talking about it, we're actively making that problem worse. People don't seek help. People don't ask questions. People don't feel safe. And so they don't get treatment. So things continue to be worse. They get worse. They continue to be bad when they don't have to be. The vast majority of people in the tech industry have access to good health care. We're lucky. Most of us are in pretty good economic shape. Not everybody, but most of us are. And yet, for the most part, we probably don't exercise those rights and those options that are available to us. So to talk a little bit about making your workplace safer for this kind of stuff, there's really sort of 5 steps that I've talked about here, and we'll get into a little bit of that. The first step really is getting buy-in from these C-level folks. Do we have any C-level folks? And I'm talking about CEOs, CTOs, COOs, those kind of folks. Anybody here do that? Anybody found a company? Anything like that? You got one of them right here. Okay. Okay. It doesn't have. It could be a small company. It's still a company. And so it is absolutely essential that, in any organization, the values of that organization are determined by what is valued at the top, and that filters down. So what's valued by your leadership is what determines what the organization is going to value. So it's very important that you do things like, if you want to make a safer workplace for mental health issues, you have to meet with executives, and keeping in mind that a lot of executives may be, for one way or another, executives or supervisors or bosses or managers are probably scared. There's a lot of legal fear and a lot of personal fear that goes into this stuff because we don't talk about it, because there isn't good information for it. And so many companies may have an attitude of they need to cover their ass, because if they don't, they're going to open themselves up to legal problems. Lawsuits, things like that. And it doesn't have to be that way, but you need to educate about those kinds of things. So it's important to do some things, sharing research, sharing legal information, and sharing ways to support employees. And those are some things that I think are essential, establishing some of those values we talked about. And some of those values might be things like discouraging work hour martyrdom. How many of you work more than 40 hours a week on a regular basis? And you would say you're expected to. Do you raise your hand if you're expected to? How about 50? 60? Anybody expected to work 60 or more? Okay. Now, I work at a startup, and I knew what I was getting into, and there are times when I work over 60, and I made a decision to get into that because I felt good about the people I'm in with. I don't regret that decision. It's good. However, 2 things to keep in mind. There's plenty of evidence that working over 40 hours, your productivity dramatically decreases. And the other side of that is that your stress levels go up dramatically too. And I would actively say that anybody who's at a job who is forcing you or expecting you to work well over 40 hours a week does not have your health care, doesn't have your health in mind. They're more concerned about what kind of productivity they think they can get out of you, even though there's plenty of evidence that they're not getting more productivity out of you. That they're not concerned about your health. And that is not just, stress and a lot of mental health issues that come up related to work are impactful not just on your mental well-being, but also directly on your physical well-being. It's important to do things like enforce vacation before it's needed. You shouldn't wait for somebody to be burned out before that they take vacation. They should take vacation before they're burned out so it doesn't happen. Making sure, another way to support employees, making sure that your coverage for mental health is consistent and equal to your coverage for physical health. Making sure that there's good information available, making sure that coverage is consistent. Transparency in the hiring process is really important. And that has to do with those things up front, declaring that you treat these things the same way and that it's okay. And that it's not, they shouldn't be afraid to ask those kinds of questions. Ask those questions like, what if I'm having a very stressful day and I feel that I'm not going to be productive and it would be better for me to stay home and work on things, take a day off. What do you think about that? Well, I think we should all feel safe enough to ask those kinds of questions, because that's extremely important, and just as important as if, well, I have been throwing up. I shouldn't come into work, right? Yeah, you shouldn't. And then there's wellness strategies that go into that too, which is kind of a little bit of a complex thing, but really just discusses how you deal with physical and mental health in the workplace and things that you can tell people to do throughout the day to encourage them to be physically and mentally healthy. A second thing is, I think that strongly all supervisors, manager types, folks who are interacting with employees, they need to have training in how to work with folks regarding mental health issues. And I think one of the best things they can do is get training in mental health first aid. I've taken this, and it's a day-long course, about 8 hours. Cost me $50 just doing it on my own. Usually in groups you'll get discounts. Some larger cities I've seen that places will do it for free. But providing explicit training for supporting mental health needs is really, I think, essential for all those folks. And I find that this is something that's used way more than traditional first aid. This aids you a lot in a lot of circumstances that have to deal with any kind of interaction you're having with folks, including things like disagreements people are having, trying to sort out conflict and things like that. It's really useful because it teaches you how to listen empathetically and try to identify areas where, how to identify and encourage people to get help, and how to know where resources are available. Talking about resources, it's really important that you know your local ones. There's not like a Yelp for mental health services. There's some things that are nationwide, but they often miss important resources that are available on a local level. So that's going to include things like support groups, often things for folks who don't have insurance, coverage for in those kinds of different situations. There's a lot of opportunities that often get missed because people aren't necessarily, they're not a doctor who's listed in some national database. So it's really important that you research community resources around here. And I think that talking to maybe a chapter of an organization like NAMI or Mental Health America, finding those local chapters and asking them what the resources are, and then going through that and compiling it in one place that's easy for people to access. That makes a huge difference. Knowing your coverage, and really making that mental health coverage transparent. It's not something that's hidden inside of a 200-page printout, employee manual. It's something that's discussed openly and transparently. It's important that your company disclose benefits plans very actively, not sort of passively. Not, oh, here's a bunch of stuff that you get when you got employed, and you're probably not going to read, and it's in an envelope, and it gets stuck under a bunch of other stuff. And providing an opportunity to meet with insurance reps to answer questions is really important, and something that a lot of companies don't do. Most don't, in my experience. Or they may offer that opportunity in the sense that they give you a phone number that you can call if you want, but they don't really encourage it. They don't really talk about it, things like that. And the fifth thing is really actively engaging and educating. And there's three sort of parts to that. And this is a big thing. It talks about awareness, resources, and promotion of wellness. And awareness really has to do with talking about sort of what it's like to have a mental health condition. And that's some of the stuff that I did initially. And initially, these talks that I was giving were really awareness talks. It's folks getting up and talking about what it's like. There's an organization specifically for tech called MHPrompt, mentalhealthprompt.org. The name is Prompt, but it's MHPrompt for mental health. And that is an organization that specifically exists to send people to speak about these things and raise awareness, to speak at conferences, to speak at perhaps your business and things like that. And so that's the first place I'd look to try to do awareness stuff. There's resources available, and collecting those resources is really important. And those include things that are local, online, tools that are available, tech tools, and things like that. There's a good website called DevPress, which is basically a forum for people specifically who are developers to talk about mental health issues and talk with other developers about it. There's also an interesting app that I just started checking out that's an open source app called checkupapp.org that maybe you might want to look at, which is interesting. And then promotion of mental wellness. And this is really about sort of life skills that prevent illness. All right? And things that you do there would be educating about psychology and psychiatry within a public forum to your company as a whole. Teaching techniques and best practices about dealing with things like burnout or stress, trying to be mindful and things like that. Peer-to-peer support groups are really, really helpful. Those opportunities to speak with other people who are having similar experiences to you are really essential and help fight that stigma and help fight that feeling of being alone and separated from everybody. And I think promoting proactive practices, sort of like talking some about exercise, talking some about nutrition, rest, social inclusion, and peer support. All of those things are really important. None of those are magic bullets. And you'll find some people who will say, oh, well, you know what? I solved my depression by drinking more water. And that actually works for some people, and that's great. Or they made diet changes, or they find this or that. And that's great, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for anybody else. And so there's a lot of different stuff that can kind of help in little ways. And maybe it'll help you a lot. But none of those things are sort of magic bullets to preventing or lessening dramatically mental health stuff. And a sixth thing, this is something we just added recently, and I think it's important, is supporting research within this. Now, this is sort of an early thing that we've been thinking about. But basically, there's very little information about what mental health is like within the tech industry, what it looks like. There's a lot of anecdotal stuff that would go around where you think, well, it seems like people who work in tech, particularly developers, maybe have certain predilections to certain kinds of mental health issues and things like that, but there's no actual information about that. And I would say reliable studies. There are lots of anecdotal stuff, but there's not. I have never seen a study that concluded definitively that, developers have much more of this than that, or compared to, say, the rest of society. However, the fact is that there's just almost no research done inside the tech industry about this, and we really need to examine that prevalence of the illness and to find best practices within this community and how it may differ from how we work on it in other industries. Basically, we don't know how the tech industry may differ from other industries regarding mental health. My suspicion is that it does in some fundamental ways. But I don't have enough info to tell you that, and because of that, we don't always necessarily know what the best things to do are. So I talked about some things you can do, but there's really some interesting and I think direct upsides that you can get out of this. And that these are things that I believe are going to happen if you can create a workplace that is safer and healthier in dealing with mental health. Healthier. So what's the upside with this? Well, the first thing I'd say is you're going to get higher productivity and motivation. Generally, employees who feel valued and secure are going to work more effectively. And they do that when their employers demonstrate a commitment to their well-being. I think that ties directly into, I don't think that when employers expect you to work tons of hours and give you shit about, taking vacation time, things like that, that does not demonstrate a commitment to your well-being. And it significantly lessens your motivation. So that kind of stuff makes a huge difference. People want to feel valued and respected, fundamentally. And people work better if they feel that way. You're going to get reduced absenteeism, workplace stress, we talk about depression, major cause of absenteeism in the workplace. If they're really stressed out, you're not excited about going to work and you probably want to avoid it. So helping employees manage their stress and their overall mental health can boost productivity, and just by the fact that they're able to go to work and feel like going to work as opposed to wanting to avoid it. There's certainly the case that health and wellness programs can help hold down health insurance rate hikes. I mean, I see that all over the place. I'm sure anybody who has health insurance knows what it's been like, say, the past 10 or 15 years, with rates going up and up and up, and all these different kinds of things getting switched around, and how problematic that is. That's a lot of these wellness programs that you'll see, they're really about health insurance cost containment. But many of those wellness programs, or maybe I'd say most of them, basically ignore mental health, despite the fact that it's such a large contributor. Preparedness for disasters. Well, and imagine this, you probably have some, it depends on the size of your company, but I haven't run into many companies that I've worked at where it was not the case that if somebody got hit by a bus, that would really suck. If somebody is not available, it may not paralyze you, but it slows you down a lot if X happens. Sarah, the sysadmin, is not here, and all the servers are down. And you've got one person who kind of knows, who can access it and kind of knows how to bring them back up. But I hope that works. Well, if you're able to assist employees in times of sudden, unexpected trauma, with counseling, peer support groups, and links to needed community services, that can help those businesses become productive more quickly. You're able to assist those people. So if the reason why they're out has to do with something like that, some kind of trauma, some kind of mental health issue that's come up, oftentimes that's something, that a life event that's come up that is surprising and unexpected, but that's sort of the nature of life. It helps them get back there faster. So you're able to get people going more quickly. You're able to get people in the loop faster. Loyalty and retention. Businesses with mental health friendly practices have documented remarkably low turnover rates. And this is from this document that I posted before that was from sandwich.gov, yeah. And along with cost savings in recruitments, new employee orientation, stuff like that. Turnover is a killer, costs tons of money. It costs tons of money to train new people. It costs tons of money to recruit and do orientation. And so lowering your turnover rates is significantly helpful. And people like working at places where they feel valued and respected. And they feel valued and respected when you are concerned about their health and have their well-being in mind. When you openly support mental health friendly policies, you certainly increase the pool of qualified applicants that you have. More people want to work for you. You're doing something different, that's something appealing that a lot of other folks don't do. So you're going to get more qualified people, and maybe the most qualified people. They're going to have an advantage. More efficient workplace practices and policies. The process of thinking about mental health can often generate helpful internal policy and benefit reviews, which, because you're being mindful of this stuff, you're discussing this stuff, you're talking about, how are our policies impacting the well-being of the people who work here, and So that stuff, I think, it really sort of raises the overall, I'm thinking about well-being of everybody here on a holistic level. And that makes a big difference, I think. I think you become a better company when you start thinking about this stuff. Better workplace relations. Generally, I think that you find that if people are mindful of these issues, it tends to create a more positive climate for understanding and for conflict resolution and support of each other. And it's really, in many ways, it's about embracing diversity and different experiences that people have and different ways that people experience stuff. And embracing diversity includes people who live with mental illness. And in becoming more inclusive, businesses can both thrive and set standards to others. And so if that's stuff that you value, diversity, acceptance, respect, I think you have to fundamentally then practice talking about mental health and making that a top priority. So I'm almost done. I've just got a couple more things here. We did this fundraiser for open source mental illness in 2015, and I did that because there's some changes. An organization that had been supporting me, Prompt, they had some changes in an organization that was funding them. And so I had to do some fundraising to pay for travel so I could come out to conferences like this. So we did this early in 2015. Gosh, I can't even remember. It was early, let's say. Before the beginning of the summer. I think it was in the spring. So we had a goal of $5,000. That's what I said. And that would get me to 2 or 3. It costs a lot to go to these things. $500, $600 for airfare maybe, and then maybe you're talking about another $800 for hotels sometimes. So you might be talking about $1,500 just to go to a conference. Some support airfare and hotel, some support part of that, some don't, and it just varies. So that would let me go to 2 or 3 that didn't support those things. So I set a goal of $5,000, and we reached that goal in 2 hours. That was pretty cool. I was really excited about that. I cried a little. And the total that we raised in the amount of time we'd set for that, I think it was 45 days. I don't know why I said 45. Probably because I was afraid we wouldn't get enough money or we wouldn't hit our goal. The total that we raised was $13,600. And I'm slightly patting myself on the back. No, I say that because I think it shows a commitment within the tech industry to talking about these things and continuing not just the discussion, but moving in directions of problem solving. And how do we try to address these issues? And one of the major things that we're going to be able to do is, with this extra money, we're working on documentation to deal with some of those things. Where I talk about those 5 or 6 things that we're trying to do that you can make workplaces safer with, to actually develop documents that we can hand out for free that guides people on how to do this stuff and deals with specifics about it, specifics about legal, specifics about program implementation, details about those kinds of things, to make tech workplaces safer for folks with mental health issues. So, and one of the things I need from you is I need your help in talking about this stuff and raising that awareness. And that means talking about this, sharing this information, learning more about it on your own. And that means talking and emailing and tweeting and posting and doing all that stuff. If there's anything I've shown here, any of these URLs or messages or words that they've mean something to you or made you realize something that maybe you hadn't before, that stuff is the best thing you can do is just keep talking about this and share it with people. I have, if you go to funkatron.com/OSMI, I have every video of every talk that I've given here. I have all the slides and also links to some resources available to it. All of my slides and all of my videos are Creative Commons licensed, which means that you can share them with anybody freely and use them in your own presentations and things like that. Do what you got to do. We also are still taking ongoing donations at JMP OSME 2015. We continue to get some money for that, and that really does help. That's going to help do things like develop another survey for those people who maybe are competent at that, not like me, and ask good questions and insightful questions and gain information about how the tech industry, what it's like to do that. So I want to thank a few people here. I want to thank Camille Wilson, Joanna Wu, Jerry Cody. Jerry Cody designed the logo that we use, and Jennifer Akulian, and a whole lot of other people that we'll talk about in a minute. Joanna Wu, Jennifer Akulian, they are working actively on the documentation that we talked about. And they have looked over this talk and helped it be better. And I thank them for making this talk better, and thank them for making it possible to be here. And I also want to thank, even though I'm not here sort of officially for them, but my employer Graph Story, and it's not here as a plug for them necessarily as a business. I do have stock options though, so it helps if you do. Graph Story lets their lead developer, which is me for some reason, take time off to come to these conferences to speak to you. And they've let me take a lot of time off considering and speak at a lot of conferences because they think it's important. And that's a real commitment to this. And without their support, I couldn't be here. So I want to thank them for allowing me to do that. It's really important and really special to work at a place that values your well-being and thinks that this stuff matters. And I think I work at a special place because a lot of them don't. And when I talk about a lot of other folks I got to thank, these are all the folks who donated in our campaign, who did not ask me not to reveal their name, and there's a lot of names up there, and it's really special. There's a lot of names from folks who are big names in PHP and other communities, and there's a lot of folks in there who aren't big names, but just thought it was important. And I think that's really significant and really special. And I think that this is about changing perceptions and realizing that this makes a difference in everybody's lives. So, that's all I got. Thanks for listening. I think that joined in link is wrong, and I'm sorry for that. I just realized I don't think I changed that, so kick my ass for that. But thank you for listening. If you want to find out more, you go to functron.com/OSMI or donate or things like that, and that's what I got. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Do we have? I hope we have maybe a little bit of time if anybody has questions. I know there's food here and probably hungry, but let's take a couple questions if anybody. All right, 5 minutes. You got 5 minutes. Okay, raise your hand if you got a question. Question. Everybody's always got a question. Hey, you got a question. There you go.
I have a question, but the link is 149.24.
I don't know if I can change that here. 149. 24. 14924.
I got it!
All right. I give this talk a lot. Anyway, yeah, a question back there, please. Disease burden, yeah. I'm having trouble hearing you, sorry. Could you?
How is the disease burden calculated?
I don't know the exact number, but I can send you to. Hi. Somebody was pointing at me and telling me to speak into the microphone. I don't know the exact calculation, but I would be happy to find if you look up World Health Organization global burden of disease, and that study was done in 2004, I believe they will have a detailed explanation of that metric. I was told there'd be no math in this talk, so yeah. But it does break it down there, so you can take a look. Were there any other questions, comments? Please go ahead.
I really, really applaud you for doing this.
Oh.
This is incredible. You're talking about having an anxiety disorder and medication, yet you're up there discussing issues and their approaches and giving advice. It's incredible.
Well,
so.
thank you. I actually strangely have a tendency to like to show off, so if you applaud me, I'll like that. I have this weird anxiety disorder where I'm not anxious about getting up in front of people, so I can't explain that. But it's a weird variant, I guess. All right, does anybody else have a question? No? All right, well, it sounds like a good time to get some food and stuff, so we'll do that. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it.